Counter-Terrorism Today.
Listening to 106.2 FM IDC International Radio. I'm Etai Handman, and welcome to Counter-Terrorism Today, the podcast that's brought to you by the ICT and IDC Radio. I'm Etai Handman, as mentioned, and today in studio we have a very special guest. We're going to be speaking about the Israeli tensions with Hamas in Gaza. Is the current status quo sustainable? News is coming out of Gaza today with some more information we will discuss with our guest, Dr. Ely Karmon, who's a senior research scholar at the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism, a senior research fellow at the Institute for Policy and Strategy, and a lecturer here at the IDC. Dr. Ely Karmon, how are you doing today?
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. As I mentioned earlier, this is a very special program because a lot of information is flowing right now. We were going to have a little bit of a broad discussion on Hamas, but things are sort of narrowing down as tensions are heightened once again on the Gaza border. We'll give a bit of a background to where we are to today, and then we can delve into more of the news of the day, if you will. So over the past year, we have seen heightened tensions with Hamas on the Gaza border between Israel and Hamas. There were multiple opportunities for Israel and the IDF to go in for a ground invasion or pinpoint operations, if you will. Due to many reasons that we can get into right now, Israel did not go into Gaza. One of those times being in November of 2018, about 8 months ago, where we saw that the defense minister, Lieberman, resigned over the fact that there was no real retaliation from Israel inside Gaza. Later, we find out that was due to an operation that was taking place in the north, and they didn't want to distract from that operation. A few months later down the road, there's another flare-up, continuous incendiary kites and balloons being thrown into Israel, the Great March of Return, protests on the Israeli border. We had Israeli soldier killed by sniper fire. We had Israeli retaliation, botched special forces operation. And then there was that weekend not too long ago just a couple months ago, where Hamas shot rockets over Tel Aviv. And then later, a barrage of 700 rockets onto southern Israel with Israeli airstrikes all over Gaza in retaliation, and a targeted killing, which is something they hadn't done in quite some time. Later on, we get a hunda, if you will. We get a ceasefire in hostilities between the two warring parties, Hamas and Israel, and other factions inside Gaza, brokered by Egypt. Qatar was involved as well, mediators from the UN as well. And that's sort of where we're standing still right now, is it hasn't necessarily been fully implemented, the ceasefire on all sides. But at the same time, we're also seeing that there's a new rise in tensions. Hamas is accusing Israel of potentially trying to poison one of its members. Hamas has accused the IDF of killing one of its members just today. So that's where we are, Dr. Karmon. That's a quick little recap of really the past 8 months between Israel and Hamas. And if we were to put this on a graph, you would really see it almost like a heartbeat go up and down, up and down, up and down. And that's really where I want to start with you. Is the current status quo sustainable, or are we in for a major conflict in a month, 2 months, or a year down the road?
You resumed very well a situation, a very tense situation for more than 1 year, 1 year and 4 months since March 2018. Situation that has challenged the resilience and the well-being of the people in the south of Israel, especially near the Gaza border. And today, not much has changed, actually. I think there are two new elements. One is that, on the one hand, the Hamas has achieved some kind of arrangement with Israel, what is called the first level, or the first part of the arrangement, which should develop in something more serious in order to become indeed an agreement. But the second element which gives Hamas more courage to challenge Israel is the period of new elections. Although we had in April elections, there is no Israeli government. Prime Minister Netanyahu has decided to go to elections in September, mid-September. So during this hot summer, Hamas can continue to challenge Israel and try to achieve better conditions for what he thinks they would like to achieve. At the same time, there is pressure, growing pressure, from the people on the ground in southern Israel, and also from the political arena, where Prime Minister Netanyahu and his party is attacked on the fact that it did not really take any serious decision how to deal with this situation for more than 1 year, and there is not clear sign how it will happen until the elections, the next elections.
So let me stop you there and ask you a quick question, Dr. Karmon. He is taking flack from both ends, the Prime Minister. He's taking it from the right wings, the left wing. Everybody is saying he's not doing the right thing in Gaza. Doesn't matter what he does, there's going to be someone that says he's doing the wrong thing. Currently, as you mentioned, there's quite a few people on all the spectrums that are criticizing him. And then we look at the fact that there are elections, and we'll get back to that in a moment. But you brought up that the Great March of Return has been going on for more than a year, and people are criticizing Prime Minister Netanyahu for not being able to put a stop to that particular element of violence that's emanating out of Gaza. We're not talking about the tunnels and or the rockets right now. We're talking specifically about the Great March of Return. He's not been able to put an end to that burning of many, many acres of fields, farmland, and making life very difficult for the southern residents of Israel. In your opinion, is there a military solution to that specific problem?
First of all, I'd like to analyze Prime Minister Netanyahu's strategy, because I think there is a strategy. There are two things that influence Prime Minister Netanyahu in his policy vis-à-vis Gaza, which, by the way, is completely different with that in the north against Iran in Syria. One is the fact that Netanyahu is known not to be eager to go to war if it's not absolutely necessary, okay? And in this, he is supported by the defense and especially the military establishment. We see it also how the analysis of IDF and IDF intelligence is supported the policy of the government. But on the other hand, Prime Minister Netanyahu clearly declares that he does not want to see kind of a real state which comprises not only the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, but also Hamas in Gaza. He wants the two Palestinian authorities to split in order to control better the situation and give the possibility to build more settlements and have a more free hand in the West Bank, especially, as I said, in the issue of settlements. So in this, by the way, he is helped by the Palestinian Authority itself, which is challenging Hamas on all levels, especially on the financial and political level. And therefore, we are at this stalemate, which is used by Hamas to try to achieve, as I said, some economic and political better conditions in the negotiations with Israel, because the negotiations are all the time continuing with ups and downs. So this is the thing that influences the situation more than for the last 4 or 5 years. There is a dispute, I think, in the political and also in the military and, if you want, the experts' vision about what can be done in Gaza. And I think there are 3 possibilities. One is to continue the present situation and striving to achieve a kind of arrangement which hopefully will lead to some kind of agreement with Hamas. But even Netanyahu today, even today, in Ashkelon, he said, I don't believe that we can really achieve something serious with Hamas. So he's only maneuvering to have some quiet for the next months. The second alternative would be to conquer all Gaza, control it like in the past, stay there 1, 2, 3 years, clean it, and then to leave it to the Palestinian Authority, to the Egyptians, God knows to whom. This is an alternative which is most of the experts and most of the military and political leaders think it's counterproductive because it's very expensive, not only in lives but also politically and economically for Israel in the future years. I believe, like some military experts, that it is possible to enter militarily in Gaza to destroy the core of the military leadership and weapons of the organization and pass it, or if you want to permit the Palestinian Authority with Arab and especially with Egyptian support to return to control Gaza. Like it was, by the way, agreed in the agreement that was signed, including by Hamas, in the 2014 the Protective Edge operation, at the end of the operation. Hamas played in order to challenge the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority was not assertive sufficiently, but I think this is the best solution on the long term. And then clearly to enter in negotiations with Palestinian authorities to a longer term agreement, perhaps peace negotiation.
So I'm going to ask you a question that I feel is brought up all the time when that option that you just brought up is made. I must say that I concur with you. It's probably the best option to bring quiet to the residents of the south of Israel and to be able to at least contend with the rocket threat coming and emanating out of Gaza. The question is, though, and this is one that I've heard on the streets, I've heard from students, I've heard in classrooms all the time. Why is it Israel's responsibility to go and defeat Hamas for Abbas?
It's not for Abbas. It's exactly for us. We want a quiet. We want a quiet situation on the Gaza border. But this is not all. When I speak about the Palestinian Authority controlling Gaza, pacifying Gaza, and improving the economic social situation in Gaza, this means that at the same time we have a partner, because as long as Palestinian Authority is not controlling Gaza, there is no real possibility of negotiations for something serious between us and the Palestinians.
To play devil's advocate, though, how would we have trust in the Palestinian Authority when they already once lost to Hamas in Gaza and have never been able to return to Gaza since 2007? And at that point, it's now being like, okay, we're going to put IDF lives on the line to return a piece of land that is not in our control anyway.
Again, it is not for the Palestinian Authority. It's for our own interests. And the things have changed. Hamas is weak, very weak politically. He is now again returning to Iran in force, almost, to Iran and to Syria. Even to Syria, and therefore they need some kind of agreement to survive. That's why they try to achieve this arrangement. And on the Middle Eastern arena, we see there is a huge change in the Arab countries. First of all, Egypt. Egypt, I'm sure, they wanted, after the Protective Edge operation, that this would be the scenario. They have interest that Hamas disappears as a military force in Gaza, not to influence the Muslim Brotherhood or remains of Muslim Brotherhood and other jihadists in Egypt itself. And the Gulf countries, and even countries like Morocco and Tunisia, are not interested in seeing the Hamas becoming the main partner in the Palestinian arena.
So could the Palestinian...
The regional... and I would say even the global, if you want, if the global framework is more favorable now to such a solution in which, by the way, the Egyptians would have a very important, critical, vital role.
So do the Palestinians have enough political clout, the Palestinian Authority that is, yes, to be able to gather a coalition of Arab countries, Gulf countries, to help support them in retaking Gaza? Because as you said, as there's a shift in attitude, in demeanor within the Arab world towards Hamas, specifically towards Israel, and of course with the Palestinian Authority. Is there some way where a solution to Gaza can be the Palestinian Authority with a coalition of Arab forces, countries backing them, and really telling Hamas, you got to leave?
I think that the policy of Abu Mazen is to weaken Hamas. We see that he is doing everything possible in his position in order to weaken Hamas. He doesn't pay them. He doesn't give support, political support. And he's fighting also Hamas at home in the West Bank. We hear all the time of arrests of Hamas cells that want to stage terrorist attacks. There is a continuous security cooperation with Israeli law enforcement and security agencies. So I think the problem is in Palestinian Authority the fact that Abu Mazen is quite old. He is probably quite ill, and there is not clear inherence to whom will take the lead. For instance, there is a leader which was the leader of Gaza, Dahlan, which is supported by the Emirates financially and even, I think, trying to subvert on the one hand, Abu Mazen, on the other hand, the Hamas. So there is a difficult situation, political situation in the Palestinian Authority, but still I don't see another better solution. There is another argument, by the way, which many Israeli, especially from the establishment, speak about it. If Hamas will be destroyed, there will be a chaos because the Palestinian Authority cannot control, and the jihadists will take the lead. Okay? First of all, if we looked historically, jihadists were active in Gaza only since the beginning of the rule of Hamas in 2006-2007. Before that, there were not real jihadists. Many of them, by the way, are ex-Hamas members, even Fatah members. So if there is a better...
That are more extreme now? When you refer to them as ex-members?
They are used from time to time by Hamas. Like in the time, Arafat used Hamas in order to challenge Israel. Okay, so Hamas is using either Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which by the way is also a tool of the Iranians. And one of my fears is that we'll have not jihadists, but Gaza becomes little by little a platform for Iran. Iran is challenging Israel through Gaza because it is challenged very seriously in Syria. We are continuously bombing their assets. They are in the defensive. There are less and less assets that resist there. And the Russians, for the moment at least, cooperate with Israel on this issue. So they try to use Gaza also as a platform to challenge Israel. And the more we are continuing on this path of not agreement and let Hamas and especially Palestinian Islamic Jihad to improve their technological means, in spite of the issue of the tunnels that are closed, but we see that on the issue of rockets and missiles and even other sophisticated like drones, like possibly they speak about some surprises. We saw that they try to develop outside in Tunisia and Malaysia more strategic weapons, if you want. And therefore, I think we have interest to destroy the military power of Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, by the way, and little by little permit this change, which will bring us to the situation before the Hamas taking the control of Gaza in 2006-2007.
So when we look at Gaza, and we look to the future right now and what we see ahead of us, based on what you've told me now, it seems that the only solution to the problems we have with Gaza is a military solution with a political sidebar, if you will. We both agree, and as you stated, it's not in Israel's interest to fully conquer Gaza. That is one option. But if we were to look at the past 3 wars that Israel fought in Gaza, you had Operation Cast Lead in 2009, Protective Edge in 2014, and Pillar of Defense in 2012. Each one of those wars, if you will, operations, was more and more deadly towards the Israeli side. There were minimal casualties in 2009-10 in Cast Lead, 0 casualties in Pillar of Defense, and then 60 casualties in Operation Protective Edge, and Israel still was not able to achieve its main goals of wiping out the arsenal of rockets. By all intelligence accounts, Hamas has recovered all of those rockets that they had lost during that war, as well as added to them. So they have a larger stockpile now. In your opinion, what do you think the type of operation that needs to be had by Israel to be able to properly subdue the threats coming from Gaza, because so far we've seen 3 operations that were successful in a way, but also only successful for a short period of time. They didn't last, if you will. That's evidenced by the last round of rocket fire, that there were rockets over Tel Aviv, plus 700 rockets in a 48-hour period out of Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the Hamas members in Gaza. So when we look ahead, we also hear Prime Minister Netanyahu saying that there is a broad surprise campaign being built up for Gaza. It's not the first time that he has said this. This could be just election talk, as we've spoken about. It could also be a serious thing that the IDF has some new surprise, some new tactic to enter Gaza, to do what they got to do in Gaza. It's wholeheartedly possible. I am not saying it's not, but the question is, after 3 tries, they still haven't gotten it right. What do they need to do differently in the upcoming battle?
That's exactly my argument. There was not clear strategy. There was not clear goal. What do we want in Gaza? There was the strategy behind this lack of strategy, of military strategy. Okay, this was the political strategy of the Prime Minister and his party, and some of supporters of this strategy. But because it is clear that another round, another operation will bring the same results. 3-4 years, we don't know. We see that because the political situation is also very unstable, we have to be more resolute, and we have to finish this issue. And again, this is a political, not so much a military. It's clearly difficult to take a decision knowing that many lives of soldiers will be sacrificed for this goal. But at the same time, we saw that more and more who is suffering more than the soldiers are the civil population. Is this a strategy that we want to continue for the next 10-15 years? To have not only, by the way, we see the around Gaza, but also big cities like Beersheba, like Ashdod, like Rishon LeZion, and even Tel Aviv under the threat of missiles. This is not a solution, in my opinion, and the Syria's government cannot be resolved only with this kind of decision, and that's, by the way, why Lieberman has decided to leave the coalition and the government, and I think the next government will have to decide. And one of the issues that will be on the table, besides the internal issues that we know between secular and religious rules, and all the issue of how to behave vis-à-vis the law enforcement, the juridical system, and so on, the issue of Gaza and the threat from Gaza to Israel will be one of the 2 issues that will influence, I think, the vote of the Israelis in September.
And as we look at the elections, and as you mentioned, a hot summer ahead of us. We're in the midst of it now. And the elections are September 17th. That's approximately 2 months from now, right now. When looking at the situation from an election standpoint, Netanyahu has 2 options: continue the status quo and talk big and potentially gain votes that way, or he has to actually go and do some action inside Gaza. And again, it could be for political purposes, it could be for non-political purposes. Having said all that, what do you think is the red line? What do you think is the trigger point? What would Hamas do to push Netanyahu far enough that he is willing to go in for some sort of operation inside Gaza before the elections?
I think that the challenge of Hamas is not so great, in the sense that they don't want the government of Israel to decide on an operation. And I think that until the elections, Netanyahu will not take any decision to go militarily inside Gaza. But as we know, in this very tense situation, there is a mistake. We had this botched command operation, which could have become a very hot issue if they took as prisoners 6 or 7 of our officers, very sensitive officers in the very sensitive intelligence apparatus. and this could be a trigger. Or, for instance, a rocket which kills, say, 7, 10, or 15 young boys or girls in a kindergarten. This could be a trigger. But this, I think, from a mistake, not as a decision by Hamas or even the Islamic Jihad, and not a decision by our government to decide at this moment to kill, to target several of the military leaders of Hamas before the elections. I think that the two sides, especially the Israeli side, will be very cautious. The Hamas side has to take in consideration every decision on the operational side not to go too far.
Earlier, we were talking about some of the Arab countries around that could be helped, and I asked the question of, does Abbas have the political power and will to gather a coalition of willing help from the Arab world? One thing that stands out to me right now within the Arab and Gulf world, and it's also showing its face in the Gaza conflict, is the fact that Saudi Arabia and Qatar are enemies at the moment. Yet Qatar is funding a lot of projects inside Gaza and directly handing money over to Hamas to pay those exact salaries that Abbas refuses to pay from the Palestinian Authority side. Does that not just undercut Mahmoud Abbas and his strategy? And if so, why isn't he trying to prevent or get Israel to help prevent Qatar's funding of things in Gaza?
This is, again, I think, one of the Israelis' interests of the government of Israel to use Qatar as a provider of financing in order to keep the situation controllable. Okay? And also because historically Israel had good relations with Qatar. I think Qatar was the first Gulf country where we had a diplomatic representation after the Oslo Agreement. But as always, Qatar is a very, I call it a jockey in the game of the Gulf and even in the Middle East and beyond. Therefore, the fact that on the one hand we want very much the Saudis to support us because they are probably the most influential, we are playing a bit with fire by permitting Qatar, which are the enemies of the Saudis or the leadership of Saudi Arabia, to be so active here, supporting a Muslim Brotherhood movement. By the way, don't forget this, because the Saudis have outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood in their own country. So the problem is, I would say, the Trump deal. Okay, this is a problem that does not permit, for the moment at least, to advance on the negotiation path, because the Palestinians have decided, I mean Abu Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, they don't want to have the United States as the mediator. They don't trust, after the recognition of Jerusalem as the Israeli capital and the other moves by the United States, they don't want the United States at this moment. And in this sense, they even resist the Saudi and the Gulf pressure on them. On the one hand, on the other hand, they also try to convince some countries, including Egypt and Saudi Arabia, not to support too much the American deal. So I think that, as I said, if we want to have a solution, this will be after the election, clearly not before the election, the Israeli government will have to think about a great strategy, which involves exactly those outside players, Arab players, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the Emirates, by the way, which are also having their own game here in Gaza Strip, and try to unite most of these forces in order to strengthen the Palestinian Authority and to give a kind of, perhaps the destruction of the Hamas could be a present, if you want, that will change the Palestinian option or the Palestinian view, not the Palestinian Authority view, vis-a-vis Israel. Because for the moment, the Palestinian Authority views Israel cooperating straight very strongly with the United States in diminishing the Palestinian Authority by supporting Hamas on the one hand and by supporting a deal which actually does not take in consideration the interests of the Palestinian Authority.
When we look to Gaza specifically, if you were to classify the threats coming out of Gaza towards Israel now, what would you say is the number one threat that southern Israeli residents should fear?
I think it's clear. It's their missiles. I don't think that the drones for the moment and the tunnels, because most of them have been neutralized, and the kind of underground wall which are building is developing quite fast. So the missiles remain the main threat, not only to the south, but also to the center of Tel Aviv. Because we saw that they have developed new longer-range missiles, and this they found, by the way, a kind of tactic how to not neutralize but diminish the effect of our Iron Dome missiles, anti-missile missiles. And therefore also the center of Tel Aviv could be under danger, not in the same way like from Hezbollah, which has many more missiles and more precise missiles, but still, because they are so close to us, this is a threat that has to be taken in consideration. I think it's taken in consideration. And by the way, one of the reasons probably why we don't go in Gaza more often.
No, it's a very scary situation, to be very honest, to think that this organization on Israel's southern border at any moment can fire rockets towards the center of the country. It's nothing new, though. Israelis are used to this type of threat. We also have that threat in the north. And we just have to, I guess, contend with these threats that face our country on a daily basis. Before we let you go, Dr. Karmon, I wanted to ask you to try to quantify what do you think the probability of an operation would be before the elections, and what do you think the probability of a operation would be after the elections if it's a Netanyahu government?
As I said, I don't think that before the elections there is a real potential for a big military operation, only in case of a mistake by one of the sides, which, by the way, also could be controlled with support from the Egyptians and the other Arab countries, which could convince Hamas not to go too far. But as I said also, I think after the elections, and it depends what kind of government we know, because we don't know for the moment what kind of government. The future government has to think about a long-term strategy and to take very courageous political decisions and military, which are backed by military measures in order to change all the strategic situation in the region. Israel cannot live and should not live under this kind of threat. It's sufficient what we have in the north, and there clearly the challenge is much bigger, and therefore it will be a very good thing that we not destroy this kind of threat, but still neutralize it in the great measure.
Well, you heard it here on Counter-Terrorism today with Dr. Ely Karmon. The threat from Gaza is real. A solution needs to be had. The status quo is not sustainable in the long run, and a real political and military solution needs to be implemented. Dr. Ely Karmon, Senior Research Scholar at the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for Policy and Strategy, and a lecturer here at the IDC. Dr. Ely Karmon, thank you so much for joining the program today. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for giving me so much time for an issue which is really very important from my point of view.
A very important issue, something that we will continue to track and follow, and hopefully have you on the program in the near future again to discuss it further. We want to thank all of our viewers on Facebook or YouTube and all of our listeners on all the different platforms, Spotify, iTunes, Mixcloud, or the ICT website or the IDC radio website. Once again, thank you to the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism and IDC International Radio for helping put together this wonderful program. Thank you to all of our viewers and listeners. It's been another wonderful program. This has been Counter-Terrorism Today, and I'm Etai Handman.
Thank you and your team.
Counter-Terrorism Today.